Hello, and welcome back. Do you believe there are rituals mortals should never know? The story we are exploring tonight is based on chilling accounts and viral whispers from the darkest, unseen corners of Thailand. We are investigating 6 forbidden rituals, ceremonies so dark. It is said that just knowing they exist is the beginning of the disaster. This is Dark Rituals of Thailand. We promise to explain exactly what happens when the forbidden is touched. Hit subscribe, because the full story begins now. Story 1, Phi Pop, the light of the greedy. There is a particular kind of arrogance that only blooms in the city. An arrogance born from spreadsheets, predictable returns, and the insulating logic of concrete and glass. Arun possessed this arrogance in spades. He wasn't a villager from Nong Khai. He was a speculator, an innovator from Bangkok. To him, the sprawling, undeveloped marshland at the edge of the village wasn't a sacred, ancestral place. It was a line item. It was potential. It was 300 hectares of unrealized assets. The elders of Nong Khai had, of course, tried to warn him. They had shared their stories over glasses of lukewarm tea in the village square. Their faces a roadmap of wrinkles, their voices thin as papyrus. They spoke of the Phi Pop, the spirits of the marsh. They warned that the land tested you, that it held a deep, ancient intelligence that preyed on the impatient and the avaricious. The marsh offers no shortcuts. Kun Arun, one old woman had insisted, her eyes clouded with cataracts but fixed on his. It offers only what is. If you see an easy path in the darkness, it is not a path, it is a lure. Arun had smiled, a practiced, professional smile that was both polite and entirely dismissive. He was a man who had built a modest empire on finding the easy path. He called it market disruption and efficiency. The elders called it hubris. He called their beliefs folklore. They called his dismissal a death warrant. He had forgotten the warning before the tea was even cold. His mind was already calculating drainage costs, land permits, and the potential resale value of eco-luxury villas overlooking a newly cultivated nature preserve. That evening, he went out alone. He told himself it was for a final survey, to get a feel for the land at dusk. But the truth, the quiet, pulsing truth beneath the logic, was that he was looking for the shortcut. He was hunting for that one variable, an unknown spring, a hidden deposit, a unique natural feature that would triple his valuation. He was, in the language of his world, seeking the unfair advantage. The sun bled out of the sky, pulling its warmth with it. The transition was shockingly fast. The marsh wasn't like the city, where twilight lingered, softened by neon and street lamps. Here, the darkness was absolute. A heavy blanket dropped over the world. The air grew thick, not just with humidity, but with a sudden, penetrating chill. It was a cold that didn't just touch the skin. It seemed to press inward, a dense, physical weight, like fog made of ice. Arun pulled his jacket tighter, a flicker of irritation passing through him. This was inefficient. His drone couldn't fly in this visibility, and his laser measurer was useless. He was walking on a narrow, raised path of packed earth, the only reliable footing in the morass. To his left and right, black water gurgled, and the reeds whispered. He paused, shining his high-powered flashlight into the dark. The beam cut a sharp, white cone, illuminating nothing but a tunnel of whispering grass and the opaque sheen of the water. He was about to turn back, to concede to the folklore for one night, when he saw it. It wasn't in his flashlight beam. It was far to his right, deep in the thicket where no man could walk. A light. It was a soft, ethereal blue, a pulsating phosphorescence that seemed to hover a meter above the water. It was utterly beautiful, clean, and silent. It wasn't the jagged, dirty yellow flare of swamp gas. It was pure, like a captured piece of the moon. Arun's heart didn't leap with fear. It hammered with excitement. This was it. The variable. A rare bioluminescent fungus. A colony of unknown insects. A geothermal phenomenon? His mind raced. Columns of figures adding up. Exclusive, marketable, unique. This was the edge he had been looking for. The old woman's words brushed against his memory. An easy path in the darkness, and he swatted it away like a mosquito. That was superstition. This was discovery. He took a step off the path. The mud sucked at his expensive boot with a greedy, organic thwack. He didn't care. He took another. The light pulsed, as if in greeting, and then, slowly, it began to move. The world dissolved into a singular focus. Aaron and the light, the marsh, the village, his spreadsheets, his 5-year plan, all of it faded. There was only the chase. The light was a perfidious guide. It moved with an intelligence that was both alluring and mocking. It would drift slowly, just at the edge of his reach, leading him deeper into the wetlands, away from the packed earth path. It navigated the treacherous terrain with impossible grace, gliding over sinkholes and through impenetrable tangles of mangrove roots. Aaron followed with human clumsiness, panting, his legs burning. With every step, the cold intensified. It was no longer a pervasive chill. It was an active presence. It wrapped around his chest, a thick, heavy band that seemed to contract with every breath. He felt it settle in his lungs, that Hoi Lang Day Nu Sung the elders had described. He was breathing, but the air felt thin, devoid of oxygen, as if he were at a high altitude. His breath, which should have been pluming in the cold, was shallow and weak. It was being stolen from his lungs before he could even exhale. Just a little further, he gasped, convinced he was moments away from capturing a sample, a photo, proof. He stumbled, falling to one knee. The black water, colder than ice, instantly soaked his pants. He cried out in frustration and looked up. The blue light had stopped. It hovered, perhaps 20 meters away, pulsing with a slow, calm rhythm. It was waiting for him. It wanted him to follow. A new sensation pricked at the base of his skull. Not fear, not yet. It was doubt. The professional skepticism that had made him a successful negotiator. He was analyzing the deal. He was deep in hostile territory. His assets were worthless. His phone had no signal. His light was a joke. And the opportunity ahead was controlling the terms of the engagement. This is a bad investment. A small, logical part of his brain whispered, cut your losses, return to the path. But the light, it was so close. To turn back now was to admit defeat, to leave money on the... A second light flared to life. It was to his left, closer than the first. Identical in its hypnotic blue-ringed beauty. Aaron froze. His mind, so adept at calculation, struggled to process this new data. 2 of them. A colony. The valuation just doubled. He felt a sudden, giddy rush, a surge of adrenaline that momentarily banished the cold and the breathlessness. He was on the verge of something monumental. He was no longer just a speculator. He was an explorer. He was the man who had found the unfindable. He took a step toward the second light, a grim smile of triumph on his face, and a third light appeared, directly behind him. It was on the path he had just left. It was cutting off his retreat. The giddiness vanished, replaced by a sudden, metallic taste of alarm. The narrative in his head shifted instantly. The language of assets and opportunities evaporated. This was no longer a discovery. It was an ambush. The narrative voice in his mind, the one that had been confidently dictating his future success, suddenly changed. It was no longer his own. It was the frantic, whispering voice of the old in Nong Khai. The pace of the marsh changed. The silence, which had been heavy, now became charged. The whispering reeds sounded less like wind and more like voices. The gurgling water sounded less like a current and more like a throat. The 3 lights stopped moving. They simply hung in the darkness. 3 points of a triangle with Arun at its center. And then he saw them, not just the lights, But the implication, they weren't lights at all. They were lures, the phosphorescent tips of some vast, unseen things. And as he stared, his eyes adjusting to the spectral blue glow, he imagined he could see them, the glowing, watchful eyes of the marsh itself. The cold was now unbearable. It was a pressure that sought to crush his ribs, to stop his heart. The air was so thin he was suffocating, gasping in ragged, useless gulps. He was drowning on dry land. The spirits of the marsh, the Phi Pop, had taken his breath. And now they were waiting. The first light, the one he had followed, pulsed once, twice. It was a signal. The chase was over. The trap was set. His professional mind, his city-born arrogance, his belief in logic, all of it shattered in a single, silent scream of terror. He was just another animal, lost in the dark, and the predators were closing in. He remembered the rest of the warning. It came flooding back, a torrent of agonizing, too late wisdom. The Phi Pop feed on want, kunarun, on that hunger inside you. They shine for the greedy. They promise you everything. And what do? He had asked, scoffing. You must remember the rules, the old woman had said, her voice a dry rattle. He remembered them now. Nong Khai, don't run. His legs were locked in place, half submerged in the freezing mud. He was trapped. He couldn't run if he wanted to. The mud, the marsh itself, held him fast. Dung Yin, don't look. He was staring. He couldn't stop staring. The nearest blue light held his gaze, its pulse slowing to match his own frantic, dying heartbeat. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing he had ever seen. It held all the promises of wealth and success he had ever dreamed of. And he could see now that the promises were hollow. They were just reflections, bait floating on an endless, hungry darkness. Dung Quen Loi Dan, don't forget the warning, the final, catastrophic irony. The one rule that could have saved him was the one he had broken from the very start. He had forgotten. By the time Aaron remembered why he shouldn't be there, he had already become just another light, another warning, for the next hungry soul to follow into the dark. The blue lights began to move, converging on the center of the triangle, not with speed, but with the slow, inevitable certainty of a balance sheet resolving to zero. Story 2. Nam Man Prai. The soul price of acceleration in the glass and steel canyons of the new city. Kavi was a ghost, long before he ever sought one out. He was a classic case study in proximity to success, an entrepreneur, a creator as the preferred vernacular went, who had done everything the seminars and podcasts dictated. He had networked, he had pivoted, he had optimized, and he had failed. His failure was quiet but absolute, a slow bleeding of capital and confidence that left him renting a cramped room with a view of a concrete wall, while men he once dismissed as peers closed Series B funding. Kavi wasn't hungry for food, he was starving for validation. He was addicted to the idea of success, the weight of a European khaki in his hand, the respectful silence when he entered a boardroom, the effortless flow of capital. He had the ambition of a titan, but the resources of an insect. This corrosive imbalance had eaten away his patience, leaving only the raw, desperate nerve of greed. He had exhausted the tangible world. Banks saw him as a risk. Investors saw him as a statistic. His network saw his calls and let them go to voicemail. So, Kavi turned his due diligence to the intangible. The name Tanit was not found on any business ledger. It was whispered in circles of desperation, a last resort for those whose problems couldn't be solved by law or finance. Tanit was a specialist in a different kind of market, the spiritual one. He was, to put it bluntly, a broker of the unnatural. He didn't solve problems, he offered exchanges, and his consultation fees were rarely paid in cash. Kavi's journey to Tanit Samnak was a physical descent mirroring his ethical one. He left the paved roads and the skyline behind, his rented scooter navigating pockmarked lanes that wound into the wetlands, the city's forgotten shadow. The air grew thick, humid, and heavy, with the smell of mangrove rot and cheap, cloying incense. Tanit's dwelling was a collection of old teak and corrugated tin held up by stilts over brackish, unmoving water. It was a place of oppressive silence, broken only by the hum of insects and a sound Kavi couldn't initially place. A slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. The Ajahn, or master, was not the wild-eyed fanatic Kavi had expected. Tanit was a man of unsettling stillness. He was ageless, his face a calm mask, his eyes holding the flat, assessing gaze of a seasoned auditor. He sat on a raised platform, surrounded by the paraphernalia of his trade, dried herbs, strange effigies, and rows of small dark vials. He was smoking a hand-rolled leaf, the smoke clinging to the low ceiling. He gestured for Kavi to sit. There were no pleasantries. "Your aura is loud," Tanit said, his voice a low monotone that cut through the humidity. "It stinks of failure, but underneath, there it is. Ambition. You want the world, but you have nothing to trade for it." Kavi, who had prepared a speech, found his throat dry. I was told you could help change a man's fortune. I will pay. I will do whatever is required." Tanit smiled, a fractional movement of his lips. "Everyone says that. Whatever is required. They say it as if it's a simple procurement. They think a contract with the unseen world is like signing a lease. They do not read the fine print." He tapped the ash from his cheroot. "You are not here for a blessing. A blessing is gentle. It is a request. You are past requesting. You are here to demand, and to demand of the spirits. You need leverage. You need something they fear, or something they desire." This was the opening. Kavi leaned forward, his heart a cold knot. "I am here for Nam Man Prai." The name hung in the air, tasting of ash and decay, the corpse oil, the most infamous and potent tool in the science art, the black arts. Tanit's eyes never left Kavi's. "Of course you are, the ultimate shortcut, the spiritual accelerant. You are the precise demographic for it." He gestured to the city, visible only as a distant, hazy glow. "They all want to be kings. They are not willing to build a kingdom. They want to buy one." "Is it true?" Kavi whispered. "What they say it can do." "It does not do anything," Tanit corrected, his tone shifting to that of a technician. "It compels. It is a focal point of intense, directed energy. When a person dies unjustly, especially a woman carrying a child, her spirit is not at rest. It is a nexus of rage, of unfulfilled desire, of profound attachment to the world she was torn from. Her prana, her life force, is trapped, curdled into a potent spiritual toxin. The ritual," he nodded toward a dark corner of the room, "simply renders it." Tanit stood, his movements slow and deliberate, a ritual in themselves. He led Kavi to the source of the dripping, in the shadows. A large clay basin was positioned under a rack. On the rack, shrouded in cloth and bound with charmed seisin thread, was a human jawbone, yellowed with age, its teeth clamped shut. From a small hole drilled in the chin, a thick, dark oil was weeping, drawn out by the heat of a single candle placed precisely beneath it. The candle flame was not yellow, it burned with a sickly pale green light. Drip, 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 into the basin. The sound was the only clock in the room. "This," Tanit said, "is the traditional method. A sorcerer must bind the spirit of a woman who died in violent, profound suffering. He performs the ritual, boiling the chin of the corpse in sanctified oils until her essence, her prey, yields. The spirit becomes a slave, bound to the oil. Whoever controls the oil controls the prai, and a prai, Kavi, is a hungry ghost." He explained the mechanics with the detachment of a chemist. The spirit wants one thing, to feel alive. It wants sensation. It wants acknowledgement. You feed it perfume. You feed it rich food. You feed it blood. In return, it serves you. It will whisper in your client's ears. It will make your words seem like prophecy. It will wrap you in an aura of charisma so dense that people will give you money just to be near you. It will grant your every single wish. Tanit dipped a wooden stylus into the basin and retrieved a single viscous drop of black gold liquid. It is the greatest tool of acquisition ever devised, but it is not a purchase. Kavi, it is a loan, the most aggressive loan on the market. The collateral is your own soul. Kavi stared at the oil. He saw his future in its reflective sheen. He saw the penthouse, the respect, the end of the humiliation. What are the terms? Kavi asked, his voice firming. He was a businessman, after all. He understood terms. The terms are absolute, Tanit said, turning back to him. This begins the bargain with the dead. You must treat the Pry as your primary business partner, more than a wife, more than a god. You will house her in a shrine. You will feed her every single day at the same time. You will speak to her, thank her, and attribute your success to her. You are the vessel. She is the power. You are the CEO. She is the entire board of directors. Tanit's gaze hardened. And know this, when greed demands worship, the requirements are total. The moment you believe the success is your own, the moment you grow arrogant, or lazy, or forgetful, the contract is in breach. She will not send you a lawyer's letter. She will come to collect. Collect what? Everything, Tanit said simply. Everything she gave you, and then everything you are. You will be left an empty shell, a vessel for her rage. Do you understand the liability? Kavi thought of his empty bank account. He thought of the eviction notice on his door. He thought of the smug, pitying looks from his former colleagues. What did he have left to lose? An empty shell? He was already one. I understand, Kavi said. Tanit studied him for a long moment, then nodded. So be it. Remember this moment, Kavi. Not all curses come from enemies. Sometimes, we willingly vow ourselves to the devil. The Ajahn ladled a small amount of the viscous oil into a tiny, sealed clay pot. The samnak filled with the sound of his chanting, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to issue from the earth itself. The dripping sound stopped. The air became dead, vacuum-sealed. When Kavi left the wetlands, the small pot was warm against his chest. The ascent was intoxicating. It was everything the Ajahn had promised, and more. Kavi followed the instructions to the letter. He set up an expensive, ornate altar in his small room, placing the Nam, man, Pry pot in the center. He fed it daily, a drop of his own blood, the most expensive French perfume, rice whiskey, and roast pork. He would anoint his forehead with a diluted speck of the oil before every meeting. The effect was instantaneous. His first call was to an investor who had rejected him 3 times. This time, the man listened. Kavi, who had always stammered, found his voice was suddenly magnetic, resonant. His bad ideas sounded visionary. His flawed projections seemed conservative. By the end of the call, he had secured a line of credit that was double what he had asked for. He moved into a glass-walled condo. He launched his new content agency. His videos, previously ignored, went viral. The algorithm, that fickle god of the modern age, seemed to bend to his will. Clients flocked to him, describing a compelling energy they couldn't resist. Kavi bought the European car. He bought the designer suits. He became a fixture in the city's most exclusive circles. He was the overnight success everyone envied, and he was diligent. For the first 6 months, he was a high priest at the altar of his own success. He never missed a feeding. He would whisper to the pot, "Thank you, May, Mother. This was your doing. We are a great team." Sometimes he felt her presence, a sudden, localized drop in temperature in his climate-controlled condo, a faint scent of jasmine and something else, something like rust. He would see a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision, a shadow that moved faster than the light. It thrilled him. It was the thrill of pure power, of having a nuclear reactor chained in his basement. But success is a powerful anesthetic. Ambition, once sated, becomes arrogance. A year into his new life, Kavi was no longer Kavi the failure. He was Kavi the visionary. He was giving keynote speeches. He was on the cover of startup magazines. He began to believe the press. He had the vision. He put in the late nights. He made the brilliant creative choices. The pry, the oil. It was just a tool, a life hack, as his new circle would call it. It didn't do the work. It just unlocked his potential. The shift was subtle. First, he was late with the offering. He was at a networking dinner, closing a 7-figure deal. She'll understand, he rationalized, rushing to the altar at 3 a.m. This deal benefits both of us. Then, he bought a cheaper brand of perfume. It's the gesture that counts, he mumbled. Then, one night, exhausted from a celebratory party that stretched into the dawn, he collapsed into his 1,000 thread count sheets and forgot entirely. He awoke with a jolt. The sun was high. He had missed the feeding. He ran to the altar. The condo was silent. The air was not just still, it was cold. A deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The offerings from 2 days prior sat untouched, congealed. The perfume bottle, which he hadn't used, was empty, the glass frosted over from the inside. "May?" he whispered. A sound answered him, not the drip of the oil, a low, wet sob. It came from his bedroom. He backed away from the altar, his heart seizing. "I'm sorry," he called out, his voice a pathetic squeak. I was busy. I'll get you the good perfume. I'll get you anything." The sobbing stopped, replaced by a sound that would haunt his few remaining days, the soft, wet sound of a woman, heavy with child, dragging herself across a floor. Shh, gulped, shh, gulped. A shadow detached itself from the hallway. It was not a void, it was an absence. It was a human-shaped hole in the world, and it was moving toward him. You forgot," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the shadow. It echoed directly inside Kavi's skull. A chorus of agony and betrayal. The prey manifested. She stood before him, not as a monster, but as she was in her final moments. A young, terrified woman, her dress soaked in blood, her belly round and taut. Her eyes were gone, leaving only black, weeping sockets. But she saw him. "I gave you everything," the voice cracked, layered with a dozen other voices. "I made them love you. I made them give to you. All I asked for was a drop, a memory of life. And you forgot." "No." Kavi scrambled backward, falling over his expensive, minimalist furniture. "I'll give you more. I'll build you a temple. Just stop." "You believe this is yours," she hissed. The glass walls of his penthouse began to crack, the fractures spreading like spiderwebs. "This car, this company, this life." She raised a translucent, dripping hand. She wasn't reaching for him. She was reaching for the concepts he held dear. Kavi felt it instantly. It was not a physical pain. It was a draining. It was a spiritual repossession, cold and brutally efficient. He felt the charisma tear away from him, leaving his skin feeling raw. He felt the luck, that golden aura, being vacuumed from his bones. He felt the creativity that had defined his agency pulled from his mind like a thread. He grabbed his phone, desperate to call. Who? He looked at his contacts. The names were meaningless. The emotional connection he felt to them, gone. He was hollow. The spirit of the woman drifted closer. "You did not build this, little man. You borrowed it. You borrowed it from me. From my rage, from my stolen child." She was at the altar. She picked up the small clay pot. It was dry, dusty. She crushed it in her hand. "The contract is in default," she whispered. her voice now flat, devoid of emotion. "The collateral is due." She didn't touch him. She simply passed through him. It was a cold that burned. Kavi screamed, a thin, reedy sound, as his very essence was repossessed. The world didn't go black, it went grey. He was left with nothing but the crushing absolute weight of his failure, magnified 1,000 times. The ambition, the greed, the desire, all of it was gone, leaving only the terror. He had defaulted on the loan, and the creditor had taken the keys, the house, and the business. He was left an empty shell, just as Tanit had promised. When the authorities found Kavi, he was sitting in his empty condo. The bank had seized everything. His clients had all left, claiming a sudden change of heart. His company had dissolved in 48 hours. He was just a man in a cheap, rented suit, staring at a concrete wall, unresponsive, his eyes as vacant as the woman's he had betrayed. Miles away, in the Samnak over the brackish water, Tanit the Ajahn lit a new green candle. He placed it under a newly acquired jawbone, this one still unsettlingly fresh. He heard the first, faint drip, drip, drip of a new product entering the market. He took a slow drag from his cheroot. He knew another ambitious entrepreneur would be along soon. The market was predictable. The demand for shortcuts was eternal. He was simply a facilitator, balancing the dark, spiritual economy. For every shortcut, there is a toll. For every unearned victory, a price. Kavi had learned the ultimate lesson of the trade, a lesson carved into the very fabric of the cosmos. A final tram, a low and heavy voice, settles over the scene, as if narrating the fine print of the universe itself. Every drop of oil is an imprisoned soul. Story 3. Phi Pop. Hunger in the corpse. It begins not with a whisper, but with an echo. For Trang, a 34-year-old creative director working out of a glass-walled apartment in District 2, the echo was her own ambition. She was a precise representative of the new urban class, educated abroad, funded by venture capital, and perpetually optimizing. Her mind was her asset, a finely tuned instrument that generated six-figure concepts before breakfast. She hadn't believed in ghosts since she was a child, and she certainly didn't believe in the crude, rural superstitions of her grandmother's generation. She believed in data, in market trends, and in the relentless, forward-moving power of her own will. Superstition was a vulnerability, and Trang, above all, was not vulnerable until she was hunger that never sleeps. The first sign was subtle, dismissed as burnout. It was 3:17 a.m. Trang was standing over her minimalist kitchen island, the blue light of her laptop screen painting her face. She was finalizing a pitch deck, the 87th slide. A dull, hollow ache bloomed in her stomach. It wasn't the polite pang of missed dinner. It was a void, an abyss demanding to be filled. She ate. A leftover bowl of $20 quinoa salad. The hunger didn't stop. It intensified. She moved on to a block of imported cheese, then a sleeve of rice crackers, then, shamefully, a handful of expired protein powder mixed with water. Her jaw ached. She consumed calories with the cold efficiency of a machine, but the void remained. Then came the sounds. Her apartment was a sanctuary of silence, high above the city, but now she heard everything. The hiss of the air conditioner wasn't a gentle white noise. It sounded like an inhalation, a waiting breath. The thump of the high-end refrigerator's compressor became a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, and other. She gripped the cold marble of the countertop. This is just stress. I'm dehydrated. I need sleep. The rationalizations, the logical frameworks that had defined her entire life, were the first line of defense. But the hunger was a primal force. It didn't care about logic. It was ancient, and it had been waiting. She looked at her own hands on the counter, slender, manicured, the hands of a creative, and for a split second, she felt an overwhelming urge to bite them, to taste the salt and iron. disbelief. It was a solid wall she built around herself. I am in control. I am Trang. This is my body. The hissing sound answered her. It wasn't the air conditioner. It was coming from her own throat. The voice inside. The doubt settled in the next day. It was a cancer on her confidence. She was in a high-stakes Zoom call with a client in Singapore. She was articulating synergy. She was road-mapping deliverables. But she wasn't there. She was watching her own mouth move. And the hunger was there, sitting in her stomach like a cold stone. The voice started then. It wasn't a voice. It was a thought so invasive, so alien. It could only have been injected. She was looking at the client's face on the screen. A man she respected. He looks weak. The thought whispered, using her own internal monologue. He's soft. Look at the flesh around his neck. So, yielding. Trang physically recoiled. She muted her mic, blaming a bad connection. She splashed water on her face, her heart hammering. The thump, thump, thump was back, but it wasn't her heart. It was something else, trapped in her ribs, beating a faster, more frantic rhythm. Let me out. This was fear, not the fear of a folk tale, but the existential terror of the entrepreneur. The fear of losing the one thing that mattered, control. The fear that her mind, her greatest asset, was being audited, and a hostile takeover was imminent. That night, she cooked. The act of creation, of precise control, usually calmed her. She was chopping galangal, the rhythmic thwack of her expensive Japanese knife against the wooden board. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It was a rhythm, like the heartbeat, like the chanting she vaguely remembered from her grandmother's funeral. The knife paused, hovering over a piece of raw chicken. Not enough. The voice was stronger now, a venomous hiss in her parietal lobe. It's not enough. We need more. We need redder. She looked at her cat, an expensive Bengal, which was rubbing against her leg. For one liquid, horrific second, the thwack of the knife and the thump of the heartbeat aligned. The smell of the raw chicken was intoxicating. The cat looked delicious. This was loss of control. The final wall had crumbled. Trang, the director, the entrepreneur, the self-made woman, was gone. She was just a vessel, and the thing inside her was starving. Her scream was silent. The voice laughed, and it was her laugh, but it was an octave lower, thick with a hunger that had slept for 1,000 years. The family found her 3 days later. The apartment was dark. The kitchen was a war zone of spoiled food and raw meat. Trang was huddled in the corner, her nails broken, her eyes wide, whispering in a dialect no one had used in a century. She was talking about the smell of the city, the taste of the living, the hunger that never ever sleeps. The exorcism was not a polite, urban affair. It was chaos. Her family, desperate, had bypassed the sterile psychiatric wards and gone straight for the old magic. The Thay, shaman, was a small, unimpressive man, but his voice was iron. The pacing of the world dissolved. The room filled with the smoke of burning herbs and the gut-wrenching, low-frequency drone of the Thay's chanting. It was a battle of frequencies, the shaman's ancient prayer, a structured, disciplined force, against the raw, chaotic static of the pop. And Trang was the battlefield. She didn't scream like a victim. The thing inside her screamed like a cornered executive. It was a bellow of outrage, of indignance. It spat curses. It howled. It fought with the strength of her own ambition, her own repressed rage, her own desperate hunger for more. The chanting rose to meet it. The screams and the prayers overlapped, twisted, and became one unbearable sound. The sound of a soul being ripped in two. Thump, thwack, hiss, scream, chant, and then silence. Sudden, absolute, the kind of silence that rushes in to fill a vacuum. The smoke cleared. The Thay was sweating, his face pale. Trang sat up. She looked at her hands. She looked at her terrified family. There was no hunger. There was no fear. There was no ambition. There was nothing. The pop was gone. but it had taken the fire with it. She was an empty apartment, clean and sterile, but no one lived there anymore. The exorcism had worked. The entity was evicted, but the body and the mind were left vacant. As the Thay packed his things, he looked at her family. Nordi Roy, it is gone, but his eyes, old and sad, stayed on Trang. The spectators, the family, felt the release, but Trang, the survivor, just felt the void, the hollow, terrifying emptiness of a soul that has just been scoured clean. Doi He, the narrator's voice would say, as the screen fades to black on Trang's empty, perfect face. Kui doi không cần den, chung chi cho một tâm trí yêu doi de got kur. Sometimes, the hungry ghost doesn't need to break down the door. It just waits for a mind, weakened by its own relentless hunger, to simply forget to lock it. Story 4. Joe Fang. The Cursed Orchard. There is a price for everything. You, as a founder, a freelancer, a creator, you know this better than anyone. It is the first, last, and only rule of a functioning system. Every venture has a cost. Every risk demands collateral. We build our careers on calculated transactions, on balancing the ledger. We respect the hustle, but more importantly, we respect the rules of the market. We know that free is the most expensive and most dangerous word in business. But sometimes we forget, we get tired, we burn out. We see what looks like a loophole, an unearned surplus, an off-market opportunity, and we take it. We tell ourselves it's a rounding error, a perk of the game. We believe, in our arrogance, that we are the first to have found it. This brings us to the case of Joe Fang, not a person, but the designation for a specific unmapped plot of land in the Highlands, a place where the system is ancient. The terms of service are written in stone, and the penalties for default are absolute. Our subject was a woman named Chloe. She was, by all accounts, one of us. A high-level content strategist, Chloe ran a 6-figure branding agency from a 14-inch laptop. She was sharp, analytical, and chronically burnt out. She lived on metrics, caffeine, and the validation of a rising client roster. After landing a major retainer, she had finally booked a digital detox, a full month at a remote bungalow in a mountainous province known for its healing properties. She wasn't there to find herself. She was there to reset her operating system. For 3 weeks, she did exactly that. She meditated, drank obscure teas, and took long, arduous hikes. She was resetting, defragmenting. On the 4th week, with her departure only days away, she found the orchard. It wasn't on any map. It wasn't on any trail. She found it by following a dry creek bed, pushing through a curtain of thick, waxy leaves, and finding herself in a valley that folded itself away from the rest of the world. The entrance was marked by 2 stone pillars, grey and porous, like old bone. They weren't carved with warnings. They were carved with what, to her strategist's eye, looked like contracts, intricate, binding symbols of agreements and exchanges. The air inside was different. You know that feeling when you walk into a boardroom and you know, instantly, that you own the room, that sense of absolute, optimized, frictionless perfection. This was it. The air was still. The light was a thick, buttery gold. There were no insects. There was no birdsong. There was only silence. It was a heavy, productive silence. The silence of a high-end server room, humming at peak efficiency. And the fruit, they hung from gnarled, ancient trees like living jewels. Long mut, rose apples, but not as she knew them. These were a deep, translucent pink, glowing with a cold, internal light. Chloe was not stupid. She was a professional risk assessor. She knew this was wrong. The silence was the first red flag. The contractual pillars were the second. The sheer, impossible perfection of the fruit was the third. This wasn't nature. This was a curated asset, a managed fund, but the burnout was deep. The logic that governed her client calls and some P&L sheets was, for the moment, offline. She saw an opportunity, a free sample, in a high-end showroom. She thought, what's the harm in one? This is the critical error every failing startup makes, underestimating the cost of market entry. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the skin of the nearest fruit. It was cool, smooth as polished glass. The moment her hand closed around it, the silence broke. It was not a loud noise. It was a faint hiss. It was the sound of fine sand pouring onto a hot plate. It was the sound of 1,000 invisible insects all drawing breath at the exact same instant. It was the sound of an ancient system logging a new transaction. She pulled the fruit from the stem. It came away with zero resistance, as if it were offering itself. She bit into it. The taste was electric. It was sweet, sharp, and shockingly cold. It wasn't like eating. It was like mainlining pure data. It felt like her first ever espresso, magnified by 1,000. Her exhaustion didn't just fade, it was deleted. Her mind, foggy for months, was suddenly crystal clear. Sharp, ideas, 3 new client pitches, a new vertical for her agency, the solution to a coding bug that had plagued her for a week, downloaded directly into her brain. She smiled, the cold juice on her chin. She had found the ultimate life hack. She plucked another, eating it just as fast, and then a third, which she stuffed into the pocket of her hiking jacket for later, a little seed capital. As she turned to leave, giddy with new energy, she noticed the ground at the base of the tree. It was dark, loamy, and rich, but there was something wrong with it. It looked wet, but it was perfectly dry. She nudged it with the toe of her boot. The soil wasn't soil. It was a thick, dense carpet, feet deep, composed of the desiccated, brittle husks of millions, perhaps billions, of insects, all of them, drained. The hissing stopped. The silence of the server room rushed back in, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a bank vault door swinging shut and locking from the outside. Chloe left the orchard, her mind already storyboarding her new projects. She didn't feel the small, sharp sting on her left wrist, right where the cuff of her jacket ended. She didn't see the small, perfectly round red mark that was already beginning to form. The transaction was complete. The asset had been transferred. The invoice had been issued. That night, Chloe was a machine. She returned to her bungalow and, for 18 hours straight, she worked. The digital detox was over. She hammered out the 3 client pitches, each one a masterpiece of data-driven insight and creative flair. She redesigned her agency's entire workflow. She was brilliant. The fruit, she thought, had been a strategic investment. As the second night fell, the fever hit. This was not a normal sickness. It was not the hot, messy, biological fever of a human body. It was a cold, precise, digital fever. Her skin burned, but she shivered, pulling every blanket in the bungalow around her. It felt, she would later recall, like an audit. Something cold and methodical was scanning her system, cataloguing her assets, and finding a discrepancy. That's when she heard the sound from the outline. The wind had picked up, but it wasn't a normal wind. It rattled the window frames with a strange, hollow rhythm, and woven into it, a low, resonant groan. It was a sound like a massive, ancient tree slowly breathing. It was the sound of the land itself inhaling and exhaling. It was the sound of the system, idling. She passed out, and when she awoke, the fever was gone. But the mark on her wrist was not. It was no longer a small red dot. It had become a dark, branching scar, spidering out from her pulse point. It looked like a Lichtenberg figure, the fractal pattern lightning leaves on a body. It looked like a circuit board trace. It looked like a root system, etched into her skin, and it itched. A deep, maddening itch that wasn't on the surface, but under the skin. When she scratched it, she didn't feel pain. For a split second, she felt a distant, phantom taste of the cold, electric fruit. The land had placed its lien. It had marked its property. She tried to work, to recapture the creative lightning from the night before, but it was gone. The brilliant ideas, the sharp pictures. They were still on her screen, but they looked juvenile, flawed, empty. The asset she had acquired was a short-term loan, and the introductory rate had just expired. This is where the horror for an entrepreneur truly begins. The Vanden, the bad luck, was not random. It was systematic. It began with her tools, her laptop, her entire life. Suddenly froze. The screen went black. A reboot produced only a clicking sound from the hard drive. It wasn't just a failure. It was a wipe. Fine. She was a professional. She had backups. She pulled out her spare travel drive and her phone. Tethering to its 4G signal, an email came through. It was from her new, major client, the one that had funded this trip. The tone was polite, corporate, and utterly final. Dear Chloe, after an internal review, we've decided to pivot our strategy. Your services, while appreciated, will no longer be required. The contract was terminated, effective immediately. She tried to call her contact. The call wouldn't connect. She tried to access her cloud backup. The page timed out. Her phone, fully charged, suddenly died. The Wi-Fi in the bungalow, which had been flawless for 3 weeks, went dark. It was not a haunting. It was a denial of service attack. The system she had insulted was now isolating her, cutting her off from the digital world she dominated, stripping her of the very identity she had built. The final blow came when she stepped outside, desperate for a signal, for any connection. The Tenkontrung Ngunglai, the stopping of the insects, was not in the orchard. It was around her. For 3 weeks. The jungle had been a symphony of noise, cicadas, birds, monkeys. Now, as she walked onto the porch, it all stopped. A 50-foot bubble of dead, sterile silence formed around her, moving with her as she walked. The natural world refused to acknowledge her. The system had blacklisted her. She was flagged as default. The decay became physical. The scar was spreading. The root-like pattern was halfway to her elbow, and the skin it covered was dry, pale, and papery. Her hair, which she had spent a small fortune maintaining, felt brittle. Her nails cracked. She was being liquidated. The land was recalling the minerals and energy she had stolen, with compounding interest. Chloe was many things, but she was not a fool. It took her 2 days of isolation, watching the black root on her arm creep toward her shoulder, to finally understand this was not an infection, it was a debt. You cannot fight a debt with antibiotics. You cannot argue with a lien. You must pay or renegotiate. She found the owner of the bungalows, a very old woman who spent her days weaving rattan mats. Chloe had tried to ask her about the local area when she arrived, but the woman had been silent. Now, Chloe showed her the arm. The old woman looked at it, not with pity, but with the cold, tired appraisal of a high-stakes accountant. She looked at Chloe, at her expensive hiking gear, at her pale, terrified face. You took the fruit, she stated. It was not a question. Yes, I didn't know. You knew, the woman said, turning back to her mat. You knew it was not yours. The tree gives. The land owns. The tree is generous. The land is just. What do I do? Chloe's voice was thin. I'll pay. I'll give it back, the old woman sighed. You cannot give back what has been eaten. You can only offer. She told Chloe what to buy, not just fruit and flowers. The price was higher. Gold, real gold, blood, her own, and something she valued, something that represented the work she had stolen the energy for. Chloe knew immediately. Her spare laptop, the one with all her backups, her entire professional history. She gathered the items. She bought a small gold bracelet from the village. She bought the finest incense and rice paper. She put her spare laptop in her bag. The weight felt astronomical. She returned to the orchard. The The stone pillars seemed taller, the carved contracts sharper, more defined. The silence was absolute, a crushing pressure. She walked to the base of the perfect, glowing tree. She laid out the offerings, the gold bracelet, a small sharp knife, the incense. Finally, she took the laptop from her bag and placed it on the dry, insect husk soil. She took the knife, made a fist, and cut a deep line across her own palm. She did not cry out. She held her bleeding hand over the soil, letting the dark red blood drip onto the dry ground. It didn't soak in. It sat on the surface, like oil on water. She bowed her head. This was not a prayer. It was a legal concession. I took what was not mine, she said, her voice dry. I broke the contract. I defaulted. I am here to settle the account. I offer this in payment. This was the moment. As described in the video outline, all sound stopped. The wind, the distant breathing of the land, her own pulse. Everything cut to a total, deafening vacuum. It was the silence before a critical error. She took a stick of incense, her hand shaking, and lit it. The smoke behaved wrong. Instead of rising, the koihung beinguk, the incense smoke flowed backward. It poured down from the burning tip, thick and heavy as oil. It streamed onto the ground, not spreading, but drilling a single, perfect hole into the insect husk's soil. It was being accepted, downloaded. An immense, shuddering relief washed over Chloe. The maddening itch in her arm vanished. Instantly, the feverish pressure in her head dissipated. She felt light, solvent, forgiven. She looked at her arm. The black, root-like scar was still there, but it seemed to be fading, the colour receding from a deep black to a pale grey. The debt was paid. The account was settled. She stood up, weak but deeply, profoundly relieved. She packed her bag, leaving the offerings, the laptop, and the blood behind. She turned and walked out of the orchard. As she passed the 2 stone pillars, she felt the silence lift. She heard a bird sing. It was over. It is here that the narrator's voice, my voice, must intervene. For Chloe made a classic, fatal business mistake. In her haste to settle, she negotiated with the wrong party. She felt a final, strange tingling in her wrist. She looked down. The scar was not gone. It had simply changed. The chaotic, branching, blight-like pattern had receded, consolidating itself. It was no longer a root system. It was a clean, sharp, perfectly simple symbol, burned into her skin, right over her pulse. It looked exactly like the corporate logo of a brand she'd never seen. The tree had forgiven, but the land never forgets. She had misunderstood the transaction. The tree, the asset, was satisfied, but the land, the ancient, sprawling and patient system that owned it all, had just reviewed her case. It had accepted her offering, not as forgiveness, not as a settlement. It had accepted her blood, her gold, and her life's work as the first installment. As her buy-in, Chloe was no longer in default. She was, officially, a new asset. The case of Joe Fang was not closed. It had just been moved to a new and very permanent file. Story 5. Kuman Thong. The golden child, the hustle for an entrepreneur, a freelancer, a creator, is a kind of prayer. You pray to the algorithm, to the client, to the cold logic of the market. You offer it your sleep, your time, your focus. You burn your incense, late-night coffee and blue light from a screen, and you hope for a return. Lynn was a veteran of this religion. Her apartment wasn't a home. It was a holding space, a command center for her freelance design business. It smelled of stale coffee, printing ink, and the specific anxiety of an unpaid invoice. She was a mother, yes, to a bright 4-year-old girl named Bayan, but motherhood, like everything else, had to be scheduled between project deadlines and client calls. She was drowning, but in the gig economy, you don't get to drown. You just learn to tread water while pretending to be on a luxury cruise. She heard about the investment from another freelancer, a guy who had suddenly, inexplicably, made it. His agency went from a two-man shop to a mid-level contender in 6 months. When she asked him his secret, was it a new SEO tactic, a private equity investor? He just smiled and slid a business card across the table. It was black, with no name, just a phone number and a single gold leaf symbol. "It's just an alternative funding stream," he'd said, his eyes empty of the usual hustle culture fire. "A spiritual one. Think of it as a very dedicated silent partner." Lin knew what it was. Every culture has its dark transactions. Kuman Thong, the golden child, a spirit, unborn, unlived, bound by magic and blood to serve a parent. She called the number. The meeting was not in a smoky temple. It was in the back room of a high-end import-export business in District 5. The man, the consultant, wore a tailored suit, not robes. He spoke in terms she understood, terms of investment, of quid pro quo, of return on assets. "You are not adopting a child, Ms. Lin," he explained, his voice smooth as polished teak. He gestured to a small, golden urn on the velvet-lined table. "You are retaining a guardian. It protects your interests. It brings fortune. It wards off ill intent. It asks only for what a child would ask for." "What's that?" Lin asked, her hand hovering over the urn. It was cold. "A home, attention, sustenance." He slid a list across the table. "Red Fanta, sweet candies, small toys, your daily acknowledgement. It is a simple contract. You nurture it. It nurtures your bottom line. You are its mother, in a spiritual sense, and it will be your golden child." Lin looked at her phone. A notification. "Invoice number 4378, overdue, 60 days. She took the deal. The golden child. The first 6 weeks were a miracle. It was, as the prompt suggested, like a sweet, gentle story between a mother and child. Lin set up a small, ornate shelf in the corner of her office, right next to her dual monitors. She placed the small golden urn there every morning before she checked her email. She would light a single stick of sweet incense, pour a tiny cup of strawberry Fanta, and say, "Good morning, Con. Good morning, my little golden one. Mum's going to work now. Please take care of the house." And he did. The client who hadn't paid in 60 days, his email was the first one she read. "So sorry for the delay. Lin, a technical glitch in accounting. The wire transfer has been sent, with a 15% bonus for the inconvenience." A massive pitch she had thrown a Hail Mary at. They called back. Not only did they want her, they wanted to retain her for the entire next fiscal year. Even Bayan, her daughter, who always had a lingering cough from the city air, seemed to perk up. She was sleeping through the night. She laughed more. Lin was meticulous with the offerings. She bought the best Japanese imported candies. She found tiny, hand-carved wooden toys. When she landed the big retainer, she even bought a small, solid gold pendant and draped it over the urn. "See, Con," she whispered, the smoke from the incense curling around her face. "You take care of me. I take care of you. We're a team." She would talk to it as she worked, her voice light and maternal. "Oh, this client is a nightmare. Can you believe this revision? Just make the logo bigger," he says. "Sigh. What do you think, little one? Should we charge him double?" She would laugh, and sometimes she thought she heard a faint echo, like a child's breathy giggle. Just on the edge of hearing, the air in the office, once stale, now felt, active, charged. One night, Bayan toddled into the office while Lin was pulling an all-nighter. She pointed at the shelf. "Who's that?" "Mummy." "That's a friend. Sweetie," Lin said, her eyes fixed on her code. "He's our little helper, Our golden child. He's sad, Bayan said. Lin finally looked up. What do you mean, honey? He doesn't have a body. He wants to play. Lin's blood went cool for a second, just a fractional drop in temperature. She forced a smile. He's a spirit. Baby. He plays in a different way. He's playing right now, helping Mummy finish this work so we can go to the park tomorrow. Okay, Bayan said. She walked over to her own toy box, pulled out a smaller red rubber ball and rolled it gently toward the shelf. This is for you, friend. The ball rolled across the floor and stopped perfectly, right at the base of the shelf. A chill, separate from the air conditioning, ran up Lin's spine. But then she checked her bank account. The retainer fee had just landed. She smiled. What a good girl, she said. But it wasn't clear who she was talking to. When the Guardian turns success makes you busy, busy makes you careless. The contract is simple, the man in the suit had said, but all simple contracts have fine print. The fine print, in this case, was human. It started subtly. Lin was on a critical Zoom call with her new, high-paying client. She was deep in a flow state, explaining a complex branding strategy. Bayan ran in, holding up a drawing. Mummy, look! Not now. Bayan, Lin hissed, hitting the mute button, her face a mask of professional calm for the camera, but her eyes burning with irritation. Mummy is working. Go to your room. Bayan's face crumpled. She ran out, wailing. Lin finished the call. It was a triumph. She closed the laptop, beaming, but as she stood up, she saw it. On the shelf, the little cup of Fanta had been overturned. A sticky, red-pink stain was spreading across the wooden surface, dripping down onto a stack of important, signed documents. Damn it, Lin muttered. She grabbed a tissue, annoyed. You too? She snapped at the urn. I'm a little busy here. You know, I am the one doing the work. The room was silent, but the air was no longer active. It was heavy, and it was cold. That night, she woke up, 3:17 a.m. It wasn't a noise that woke her. It was the absence of it, the hum of the refrigerator, the street sounds, the very air in the room. It was all muffled, as if by a heavy blanket, and she felt it, that primal, animal sensation of being watched. She opened her eyes. At the foot of her bed, in the sliver of moonlight filtering through the blinds, a figure stood. It was small, the size of a 3 or 4-year-old. It was just a shape, a child-shaped hole cut out of the darkness. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just stood, and it watched. Bayan, Lin whispered, her voice thick with sleep and a sudden, terrible acid of fear. The figure did not move. It did not answer. And as her eyes adjusted, she saw 2 pinpricks of light, not reflections, but a kind of internal, cold illumination where its eyes should be. It was, as the ancient terror describes, unblinking. Lin's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a cold fist. She was paralyzed. This was not her daughter. She stared at the shape, and the shape stared back. A minute passed. 10. An eternity. Her freelance honed discipline, her get-it-done attitude, was useless. This was not a problem a spreadsheet could solve. Finally, she squeezed her eyes shut. A primal, if I can't see it, it can't see me, defense. She counted to 100. When she opened them, it was gone. She shot out of bed, her limbs shaking, and burst into Bayan's room. Her daughter was fast asleep, her breathing even, her face peaceful. Lin collapsed against the doorframe, gasping, a nightmare. Just a stress-induced nightmare. The pressure of the new contracts, that's all. She walked back into the hallway, her heart still hammering, and she saw it. Leading from the foot of her bed, all the way to the office, was a trail of small stations, wet footprints, not water. They were sticky. She followed them, her bare feet sticking to the floor. They led to the office. They stopped at the shelf. The bottle of Fanta was on the floor, empty. The bag of candies was ripped open, the sweets scattered, and sitting in the middle of the mess was the red rubber ball Bayan had offered. It was torn, shredded, as if by tiny, inhumanly strong hands. "You're just a kid," Lynn whispered to the urn, her voice shaking. "I'm doing my best. What more do you want?" A sound answered her. Not a giggle. It was a cold, high-pitched whistle. The prompts, "Tengyo rit nye trong ong," wind whistling in a pipe. It was the sound of air being forced through a tiny, unformed throat. It came from the air conditioning vent, but it was in the room. It was the sound of a command, of impatience. The next day, Lynn lost the big client, the one who had retained her for the year. The email was curt. Unforeseen circumstances. She went to the shelf. The Fanta stain was still there. She hadn't cleaned it. "You did this!" she accused the urn. "That was our money. I did this for us." Another sound. From the living room, Tengdo Choi Lan, the sound of a toy rolling. She walked out. Bayan was in the playpen, but she was cowering in the corner. In the center of the playpen, one of her wooden blocks was spinning, impossibly, on one corner. "Bayan? What's wrong?" Bayan just pointed, her eyes huge with terror. "The friend is angry. He's a mean friend. He said you're a bad mummy." "What?" "He said you forgot the candy. He said he's the real child. He's the golden child. I'm just the other one." The spinning block suddenly shot across the playpen and hit the bars. A sharp crack that sounded like a bone breaking. This was the pivot. The moment the audience, the entrepreneur, recognizes. This is the sunk cost fallacy. This is the bad investment you've poured too much into. The partner who is now a liability. The deal that has turned predatory. Lynn had entered a transaction, but she had misunderstood the terms. The Kuman Thong was not a guardian, it was a creditor. And the payment was no longer Fanta, it wanted equity. The final day was silent. The Lang Nu Chet, dead silence, of the prompt. It was a silence that was louder than any scream. Lynn had been in a daze for 48 hours. No work, no calls. She had just sat on the sofa, watching the apartment. Everything felt hostile. The shadows were too long. The air was too cold. Bayan hadn't spoken. She just sat in Lynn's lap, clutching her. "We're going to leave," Lynn whispered, the decision finally forming. "We'll go to Grandma's. We'll leave it all. The computer, the clients, all of it." She was packing a small bag, diapers, a change of clothes, her wallet. Bayan was in the living room, watching cartoons, the sound on mute. "Bayan, go get your blue sneakers. Honey, we're going on a trip." No answer. "Bayan?" The apartment was still. The mute TV cast silent, flickering colours across the room, but Bayan was not on the sofa. "Bayan!" Lynn's panic was instant and absolute. It wasn't the normal panic of a mother who has lost sight of her child for a second. It was the specific, cold iron terror of a woman who knew exactly what was in her house. "Bayan, this isn't funny." She ran to the kitchen, the bathroom, her own bedroom, empty. Then she saw it. The door to Bayan's bedroom closet, which was always jammed, was closed. A sliver of light was visible underneath. "Oh, thank God. Honey, are you hiding?" Lynn laughed. A hysterical, breathless sound. She pulled on the handle. It was stuck, or held. "Bayan, open the door." A sound from inside, a giggle, but it wasn't Bayan's. It was the other one, the cold, whistling giggle. "No!" Lynn screamed, yanking the handle with all her strength. The cheap wood splintered, and the door flew open. This was the climax, the kowtow. Bayan was inside. She was backed against the far wall, her face pale, her lips tinged with blue. Her eyes were wide, staring at something right in front of her. "Mummy!" she choked. Lynn's eyes followed her daughter's gaze. There, standing between Lynn and her daughter, was the Kuman Thong. It was the first time she had seen it in the light. It was not a shadow. It was small, naked, its skin a pale, smooth gold, as if it had been lacquered. Its eyes were black, polished stones. It held the small golden pendant Lin had given it. It turned its head, a slow, clicking sound like a doll's joint. It looked at Lin. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was satisfied. It had won the pitch. It had closed the deal. It had successfully pushed out the competition. It raised one, small golden hand, and pointed. Not at Lin. Not at Bayan. It pointed at the open door. Leave. Lin didn't scream. The prompt was right. It was a tieng het ngen, a muffled, choked sound, the sound of a soul being foreclosed on. She lunged for her daughter. The Kuman Thong didn't move. It just watched. Lin grabbed Bayan, pulling her into her arms. The child was ice cold. "I'm sorry," Lin whispered, over and over, backing out of the room. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." She ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the blinding, indifferent city sunlight. She never went back. She left the laptop, the contracts, the clients, and the small golden urn. The business she had bled for was gone. The apartment was claimed. The deal was concluded. The consultant in the suit had told her the truth. It was a simple contract. She was its mother, and it was her golden child. It just never occurred to her that a child, especially one that had never known life, could be so jealous, that it would not tolerate a sibling. She had made a common business error. She had invested in an asset she could not control. She had entered a partnership without reading the true terms. And now, the severance package was her own life. She had her daughter, but she had lost her home, her livelihood, and her peace. And in the dead of night, in the new, empty apartment, she can still hear it, a faint, rolling sound, like a toy on a wooden floor, an echo on the edge of hearing, like a child's breath. Tingjio ritnya, the sound of an unlived life, waiting. It had been given protection, but it had no concept of love, only of possession. It had been given offerings, but it understood only hunger. Do not pray for protection from souls who have never lived. Story 6. The Sixth Curse. There is a sound that lives between the rattle of the night wind and the sharp, hollow hal-ik of ancient Thai percussion. It is a sigh. It is not a sigh of relief, nor one of simple sadness. It is a sigh of release, the sound of a promise expiring, of an emotional contract being voided. It is the sound of love curdling into something else, something colder, something permanent. In the humid dark, tucked away behind the canals and the burgeoning high-rises, the banana groves still stand. They are not farms, not really. They are relics, green, lush, and watchful. Their broad leaves hold the moonlight like cupped hands, gathering the silver light until it spills over. The locals, the ones who still remember the old ways, they do not walk here after dusk. They do not cut the trees, and they never ever take the fruit. They know who lives here. They know that this grove is not a place, but a person. She is called Nang Tani, a name spoken in a whisper, carried on that same sighing wind. But she was not always a whisper. Once, she was a voice. Her name was Pimchan, and she was a woman whose love was a covenant, an unbreakable bond forged not in a temple, but in the damp earth beneath this very grove. He was a man of ambition. Let us call him Chai. He was, in the parlance of your modern world, a startup, a visionary, a man who saw the future and intended to build it. Pimchan was not just his partner, she was his first investor. She invested everything, not money, but belief. She was the foundation upon which he built his first dream. They met under the full moon, the same moon that would later become her only witness. He spoke of plans, of legacy, of enterprises that would reshape the skyline. She listened, and in his grand vision, she saw only a small, shared future, a home, a life, a loyalty that was absolute. He made his promise there, his back against the smooth, cool trunk of the largest banana tree. My success is our success, he vowed. his voice earnest in the heavy night air. I will never leave you. This tree is my witness. My heart is yours. Love, for an entrepreneur like Chai, is an asset. But like any asset, it can be leveraged. It can be liquidated. Success came. It came not as a gentle rain, but as a flood. With it came new partners, new opportunities, new cities. With it came a different kind of woman, one who understood spreadsheets better than soil, who wore ambition like perfume, not like a promise. Pimchan, the foundation, became an anchor. Their shared dream became his burden. The grove became inconveniently located real estate. The betrayal was not a single, dramatic act. It was 1,000 small cuts. It was the meetings he forgot to mention, the scent of another's perfume on his silk shirt, the cold, polite tone that replaced the warmth of their shared language. He began to speak of pivoting, of strategic realignment. He was, in essence, phasing her out of his own life's business plan. The final cut was an eviction notice, not from a landlord, but from him. He had bought the land. The grove was to be cleared for a new condominium project, his flagship. It's just business. Pimchan, he said, avoiding her eyes. We must move forward. The past is the past. Pimchan did not rage. She did not scream. The woman who had invested her entire being into a shared enterprise simply watched her portfolio collapse to zero. She walked into the grove that night. As the first bulldozers sat waiting at the perimeter, the moon was full, sharp, and cold. She stood before the tree that had witnessed their vow. She looked at the heavy, green cluster of bananas. The key, the heart of the tree, hanging low like a bleeding heart. She did not use a rope. She did not use a blade. She simply stopped. She exhaled, a long final sigh that emptied her of life, of love, of hope. And as she crumpled to the earth, that sigh did not dissipate. It caught in the broad, green leaves. It wrapped around the trunk. It merged with the scent of night blossoms and damp soil. When Chai's crew arrived in the morning, Pimchan was gone, but the grove was different. The air was thicker, colder, and a single, perfect banana tree, the witness, stood where she had fallen, though it had not been there the day before. Its leaves were a shade of green, so deep they were almost black, and its fruit, a pale, ghostly white. The crew refused to cut it. They spoke of a woman they saw standing in the shade, dressed in traditional green, her feet never quite touching the ground. They complained of a soft, feminine sigh that echoed in their ears. Even over the roar of the engines, Chai, pragmatic and impatient, came himself. He saw the tree. He felt nothing. It was a delay, a cost. He raised his own axe. The moment the steel bit into the bark, a sound emerged. Not the thwack of wood, but the sharp, hollow click of a temple block. A red sap, thick as blood, wept from the cut. And then came the sigh. It was not in the air. It was in his head. My heart is yours. He stumbled back, unnerved. He ordered the project halted, rerouted. He built his condominium complex around the grove, hiding it behind a tall, concrete wall, an inconvenience. He told his new partners, a zoning issue, but the sixth curse is not about inconvenience. It is about debt. Chai's empire grew, but his life hollowed out. He lived in the penthouse of his flagship building, overlooking the city he had conquered. But he was never alone. On nights of the full moon, she would come. Nang Tani, she would manifest not as a horror, but as a memory. He would be closing a multi-million-dollar deal, and suddenly, the click, click, click of the percussion would drown out the voice of his CFO. He would wake at 3 a.m. to the scent of banana blossoms filling his sterile, air-conditioned apartment, and he would hear the sigh. It was the sound of a bad investment finally coming due. She never harmed him. She was, after all, still Pimchan. She did not want his blood. She wanted his focus. She wanted to be remembered. She became the ghost in his machine, the silent partner in all his transactions. His new wife complained of a cold presence, of a woman's silhouette standing by the window, looking not at the city, but at the small, hidden grove below. His partners saw his focus drift, his eyes glaze over as he listened to a sound they could not hear. His empire began to crack, not from a hostile takeover, but from a profound, internal rot. The curse was this: he had built his future on a broken promise, and now the past was its only tenant. Love bound to death is not a chain, it is a haunting. It is the realization that some assets can never be liquidated, and some debts are paid not in currency, but in sanity. It is the final feminine whisper in the sterile boardroom of a man who gained the world, only to realize he had voided the only contract that ever mattered. The wind sighs through the grove, the kul-urk of the fach keeps its lonely rhythm, and Nang Tani waits, wrapped in her green leaves, forever bound to the heart she was promised. So, after this entire journey, what do you think? Is curiosity truly the original sin, or is it just the most dangerous gamble a thinking person can take? In the cultural and spiritual context of these legends, sin isn't a judgment on your moral character. It's a procedural term. It's about cause and effect. Curiosity is simply the first domino. It's the act of providing the input to an ancient, autonomous system that guarantees a catastrophic output. Many Eastern folk traditions view these rituals as dormant contracts. They don't care about your intent. They don't care if you're a skeptic, a believer, or just filming a video. The moment your curiosity becomes an act, the moment you speak the words or draw the sigil, you have executed the code. The sin is the arrogance of interacting with a system you cannot control, one that was, as the text says, never meant to be known. It's the ultimate procedural error, and the consequences are absolute. I'm genuinely interested in your analysis. Is this a necessary warning or a metaphor for taboo? Drop your perspective in the comments. If you value this kind of breakdown, subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss the stories we're investigating next.